If I had to pick just one root vegetable to grow in my garden, it would have to be trouble-free, super hardy, easy to store, and of course, tastes magnificent. Well, there's one vegetable that's all of the above and more. I'm talking about truly indulgent parsnips. And in this video, I'm going to prove to you why you should grow them and how. So we should probably start by addressing the elephant in the room, which is that parsnips have a bit of a reputation of being tricky to get started. It's probably because they're very slow to germinate. But if you start with fresh seed and sow only once the soil has properly warmed up, you should have no problem. So don't worry, today we're going to make sure you succeed. Now, I've often heard it recommended that the time to sow is once you can comfortably sit on the soil with your bare bottom. Don't worry, I'm only joking. I'm not going to subject you to that. But what I can do is just feel with my wrist or the back of my hand that the soil isn't at all cold, it's pleasantly warm, so we're definitely good to get on and sow. Parsnips do best in a lovely sunny spot, and because they produce really big, decent sized tap roots, we also want to find a spot that has nice, loose, free draining soil. Now, I don't particularly mind forked roots. Sometimes they're quite funny actually, but if that does bother you, then do try and pick a spot that isn't too stony, or just pick out the worst of the stones if you can. And also, don't sow your parsnips in ground that's been recently manured or had lots of compost added, as that can also cause the roots to fork. So this is the kind of thing I mean by forked roots. You can see they're split here, get some very odd shapes. This one looks like it's crossing its legs and badly needs a pee. So I've set my drills about a foot or 30 centimetres apart, and I'm just making them roughly a centimetre or half an inch deep to sow into. It's been quite dry recently, so just to make sure there's a lovely moist environment around the seeds, I'm going to water into the bottom of the drill like this. If we take a look at the parsnip seeds, they're kind of thin and papery, but I reckon very beautiful actually. And because they're a easy enough size to handle, they're going to be a lot easier to sow than, say, carrots. Now, you've got two options to sow them. You can take little pinches and go as thinly as you can, or if you're sowing a relatively small area like this, you can actually pick them up individually and just sow them one at a time. Yes, it takes a little bit more dedication and kind of time, but actually makes the job a lot more kind of precise. And we're aiming to space the seeds roughly an inch or a couple of centimetres apart. Now, parsnips are famously slow to germinate. They can take 3 to 4 weeks, which means that it's tempting to write them off if you don't see them coming up after a couple of weeks, but patience is a must. However, I've got a neat little trick to share with you that will help you to not lose faith, and that is to sow a row of radishes in exactly the same drill as you've just sown your parsnips. Now, there's method in the madness. Radishes take just 4 to 6 weeks to go from seed to harvest. Now, that's plenty of time to mark out the row so you know where your parsnips are, but they'll never compete with your parsnips because they'll be long gone way before the parsnips are inconvenienced by sharing their row with the radishes here. The best bit is we're going to get 2 crops from the same row in the same amount of time, which is just magnificent. Although double sowing your rows with both parsnips and radishes shores up confidence and will neatly mark out where your rows are, it doesn't actually speed things up. But I have an ingenious little tip that will do just that. Come on. Some of you might be familiar with pre-sprouting or chitting seed potatoes to get a bit of a head start. Well, believe it or not, we can do exactly the same with parsnip seeds. Chitting parsnip seeds is really simple to do. I just need a lidded container like this, and I'm going to line the bottom of it with a sheet of kitchen towel like this. So fold it in half, popped in the bottom, and then I'm going to wet it so it's nice and moist to get the seeds germinating. Now I can take my seeds and just scatter them over the top of the moistened kitchen towel like that. and then take a second sheet to cover them over. And again, this needs to be slightly wetted, just so the seeds are nice and moist all around. There we are. And then to keep the moisture in, just pop on the lid. Now this is going to go in a warm, kind of dark place. Indoors is just fine, in a kind of cupboard, and just keep it there, but do not forget it. After about 4 or 5 days, just lift it up, carefully inspect the seeds to see if anything's happening, and then refold them and put it back and just check daily. And once you see plenty of little roots, then you're good to go. And here are some I've chitted earlier. They've been in here about 6 days, so we might see some action. If I just peel it back here, yeah, we can see just a couple of them have started germinating here. And if you look here, you can see the tiny little root has emerged. We don't actually want them any further than that. This is fine. We just need to see that the seed is viable and has actually germinated. If the shoots get too much longer than this, there's a risk they could snap. The real advantage of pre-sprouting like this is that I know exactly how many seedlings I'm going to have. So I know that I've got 100% germination success from the ones that I've chitted and put into the soil. So there's no problems with sort of patchy germination or the risk of having to re-sow to fill any gaps. I'll sow them exactly as I did my other seeds, so 1 centimetre or ½ an inch deep. But this time I can space them a little bit further apart because I know we've got solid success here. And because these have chitted within 1 week, well, I'm going to get at least a few days head start on things that are sown outside without pre-sprouting. That's a smart move. Juggling crops is always a bit of a challenge. Parsnips can take quite a long time to go from seed to harvest. So one way to get a bit more out of the ground space you have is to start your parsnip seeds, your slow starting parsnips, out of the ground to then have little seedlings to plant. And the best way to sow them is to sow them into little toilet roll tubes like this. So I've got a few here to demonstrate. You probably want more than this, but here we go. So I've nestled them into a little tray here to keep them from kind of falling over. And then into each little tube goes some sifted potting mix like this. So I've lightly firmed in the potting mix to remove any air gaps. And now I can sow my chitted seeds here. So take great care and concentration here. Pick it up with the tweezers and just transfer it across. And then with that done, I can just cover the seeds back over with a little bit more of the potting mix here. Now, it's quite dry and obviously we need to get it nice and moist. So I'm going to wet the surface here to get started. And I'm going to keep this consistently moist, but just moist enough that the sides of the toilet roll tube here dry out between waterings. And that'll mean it won't get all sort of mouldy, but the seed itself is getting plenty of moisture. And if I reach behind me here, I've got some that I sowed and grew on earlier, and these are actually now at a really good size to plant. We've got our first true adult leaves here. They're nice and healthy. Now, because I've grown these out as little plants, I'm going to plant these in a block formation about 8 inches or 20 centimetres apart in both directions, or you could go a little bit further than this if you wanted really big roots. If you've never tried your own roasted parsnips with garlic and a good squeeze of honey, well, you are in for a real culinary treat. Having sown your parsnips and with them sprouted, you're well on your way to that exceptional experience. Now, once the seedlings do pop up, start thinning them out, removing excess seedlings in stages until you've got little plants about 6 inches or 15 centimetres apart. And with that, also keep them weed free. You don't want weeds competing for moisture and nutrients. I don't want to disturb those delicate roots at this stage, so err on the side of caution and hand weed if possible. Having a good solid taproot means parsnips are pretty tolerant of dry conditions, but you'll get the best results if you water them, especially while they're quite young. Also, larger roots can tend to split in really bone dry conditions. So Just avoid all that by keeping plants relatively well watered if it is quite dry. And I also like to mulch around my plants using my choice of mulch, which is lovely, fresh, dried grass clippings sprinkled over the surface to shade the soil and give weeds a bit of a tougher time of it. One of the great joys of growing parsnips is that once they're well established and getting away, they have very few problems. They kind of take care of themselves. The only small issue, which I've never experienced, or rather my parsnips haven't, is carrot fly. Now these low-flying flies come along at ground level and then lay their eggs right at the top of the shoulder of the root down here. They then burrow in as they feed and create little tunnels which can kind of go brown. That said, parsnips are rarely as badly affected as carrots, so another reason to prioritise them perhaps. But they can cause a little bit of cosmetic scarring, so if that bothers you, the simplest thing to do is just cover your entire parsnip crop with something like an insect mesh or a row cover of fleece, just to keep the carrot flies out once and for all. Damaged roots, usually caused by carelessly wielding a hoe about to remove weeds, can make your plants more susceptible to parsnip canker. Now this is a disease that will turn the shoulders of the roots a kind of browny orange as they start to rot. Well, that's the bad news. The good news is it's very simple to avoid parsnip canker simply by choosing a parsnip canker resistant variety, of which there are plenty. Now, a little bit of a word of caution when handling parsnips. It's a nice cloudy day today, but on sunny days, handling the leaves can give some people a bit of a rash that can be quite painful. It's not the end of the world, but it's not pleasant either. So if it is sunny and you need to work in close proximity, just be sure to wear some gloves. Lifting up and positively gorging in decadent fashion on these ravishing roots begins as soon as the leaves start to die back in the autumn. At this point, there won't be any further growth until next growing season, and the roots will be as big as they can get. Now, it might be worth waiting until after your first hard, good frost, and that's because cold weather makes the taste of these roots, well, it really ramps it up because it turns the starches in the roots into sugars, which means that the roots go from yummy to positively otherworldly. To harvest the roots, just get a fork in there, taking care not to stab the roots themselves, and rock it back and forth to ease up the roots while pulling them so as not to snap the roots. Now, you can lift them as and when you want to enjoy them, but if the ground does freeze rock hard for weeks on end, then I would preempt that by lifting up your roots all in one go and then storing them in breathable boxes of damp sand or old potting mix. Or simply cover the area with a nice thick cushion of straw to stop the ground freezing really hard. If you're using our garden planner, it can help you get the spacing of your parsnips just so, whether you're growing them in rows or in a block. I hope I've convinced you that parsnips really are the best, but if carrots are more your thing, no problem, just stick around to the very end to watch my Carrot Growing Masterclass. In the meantime, if you haven't yet taken advantage of the free 7-day trial of our garden planner, well, what's been keeping you? It's time to put that right by just following the links over there to start your trial today. I'll catch you next time.